Welcome once again to another edition of Good Books. I'm your host this week, Dr. John Cook, and with me today is Ai-Jen Poo, who is the director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and co-director of Caring Across Generations campaign. She's the winner of a 2014 MacArthur Genius Grant. She's been organizing immigrant women workers since 1996. In 2000, she co-founded the Domestic Workers United at the New York organization that spearheaded the successful passage of the state's historic Domestic Workers Bill of Rights in 2010. Among her numerous accolades are the Ms. Foundation Woman of Vision Award, the Independent Sector American Express Ai-Jen Leadership Award, and being chosen for Newsweek's 150 Fearless Women list and Time's list of the 100 most influential people in the world. I'm impressed by the resume, but even more interesting is the book, The Age of Dignity, Preparing for the Elder Boom in a Changing America. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, John. It's great to be with you.
This book is, of course, very timely, in part because of the demographics. We're about to experience a serious elder boom as us baby boomers get older.
That's right. Every day, 10,000 people turn 65 in America. And so that means in 2015 alone, 4 million of us are going to reach retirement age. And my grandmother's demographic, 87 and older, is actually the fastest growing demographic in the country because people are living longer. So we've got quite an elder boom on our hands.
Mm-hmm. And we're caught up in this issue because of that extended life leading to more people showing the symptoms of dementia, among other things.
Dementia, number of chronic illnesses, absolutely. The estimations are that by 2030, 20% of our population will be over the age of 65, and by 2050, 27 million Americans will need some form of long-term care or assistance, including millions and millions of us who will have Alzheimer's. So it's something that will affect 27 million directly, but really all of us directly, because we all have a loved one who will need care or assistance, or will be providing that assistance ourselves. Or Rosalind Carter once said that there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: people who are caregivers, people who will be caregivers, people who need care, and people who will need care. And I think that we can all identify with that.
Mm-hmm. This expanded life expectancy, 30 years we've gained over the 20th century in terms of life expectancy, while cancer is still the cause of death for about 20% and organ failure for 25%. If you make it to 75, or you make it into your 80s or 90s and maybe even to 100, because we're just able to defeat those diseases better than we used to.
That's right. And it's a good thing. We believe that I believe, and my organization believes, that living longer is really a good thing. It's the opportunity to love longer, to learn longer, teach longer, work longer, experience all that life has to offer if we have the right supports in place. And what this book is really showing is that we actually don't have a system in place to support the tremendous caregiving needs we're going to have in the future. And so it's on all of us to work together to create it. And in so doing is a tremendous opportunity to address a number of our nation's problems.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting how you show us the synergy of the system and how it needs to be integrated and work together. Let's talk about a couple of things with regard to care. One is the poor sandwich generation. 1 out of 8 Americans is in that group who's caring for both children and aging loved ones. And family members can be part of the solution, but they cannot possibly meet all the needs. And this is something my father learned the hard way when Mom came down with Alzheimer's. He tried to do it all himself.
Oh, there's no way. There's a chapter in the book, the subchapter that says moving from superhero to super friends, because we really do believe that this is a model that has to be a team effort. We need care teams that are paid caregivers, family caregivers, all of us working together to make sure that caregivers also have the supports they need in the very important role that they'll be in, whether they're family caregivers or paid caregivers, and that our elders have real options to address the specific and varied kinds of experiences and needs that they'll have. So this is going to be an all-hands-on-deck situation, and it's doable if we think about it as how are we going to come together as a family and as a team with paid caregivers and healthcare professionals to all work together.
And I don't want to miss the point you made a little earlier about growing old can be a good thing, because our society is sort of wired to value the young over the old. You write a good piece about that.
It's true. We have a number of big culture shifts that we need to make to really embrace the possibility of what it could mean to have 30 more years to live, especially to live well if we put the supports in place. And one of them is really about turning towards aging and embracing it for all of its joys and complexities. I mean, there's so much in terms of the value of multi-generational relationships and all that older people have to offer and share and learn as full participants in society. I mean, really what we're doing is leaving enormous talent on the table when we don't look to our elders for their wisdom and experience as we think about the future. So there's a lot of just a turn towards things that we've either taken for granted, that have not been visible, or that we've really undervalued, like the contributions of our elders.
Mm-hmm. And it's steeped in the American culture. That study by Dove that asked women worldwide which decade of life women reach the peak of their beauty, and in America it's about half of them said in their 20s, but French, Italian, and Brazilian said a woman's more beautiful in her 40s. American hospitals give preference to younger patients over older patients because they're more valuable to society, and yet other cultures revere their elders.
It's true, and it's manifested in so many ways, including the fact that we have a real lack of geriatricians and gerontologists in this country. Given the numbers of older people we will have, the numbers of trained healthcare professionals who have a specific expertise in dealing with illnesses and other conditions that come of living longer is really, really small, and we really need to grow that field. That's just one manifestation of it. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that boomers are really a culture-driving generation. So if any generation was going to change how this country feels about aging, I believe it will be the boomers. So I have hope that we can actually redefine what it means to age and live well as we age by really looking towards boomers and in multi-generational effort to really transform what we need here.
Well, I sincerely hope that you're right, and I would love to be a part of that as a boomer.
We're counting on you, John.
But there's still this stigma, this fear, I guess, about aging and becoming disabled and having dementia and all of that. It's just we really haven't faced death, is I guess the reality of it as a culture.
It's true, and one of the things that I'm going to be asking people that I meet on my book tour to do is actually go home to their families and have a dinner table conversation. And at that conversation, discuss two simple questions as sort of guiding questions for what we should be thinking about and talking about. The first is, how will we as a family come together to prepare for our future caregiving needs? Because frankly, when you have a plan, it's much easier or when you're thinking very practically about what a plan could look like, it's much easier to face the future when you're fearful. And the second question is, what do we imagine could be the joys of caring for one another as we age in the future? And I think that not enough of us really talk about and think about the joys that do come and the connections that do come of caring for one another. And we hope that that becomes a different entry point for us to have a larger conversation about caregiving as a priority for the future.
And one thing that I hope comes up in those family discussions, you mentioned an AARP survey, but most folks want to be at home.
Oh, yeah.
Home care.
If my family is any indication, I mean, the AARP survey found that 90% of Americans would prefer to age in place in their homes and communities, of course, connected to their families and their loved ones. And, my grandfather wanted to stay at home and couldn't, and we put him into a nursing home, and he spent the last 3 months of his life really fearful and alone, and I will always regret that that's how he spent his final days after caring for so many of us. My grandmother, on the other hand, is living independently in the same apartment she shared with her husband, my grandfather, and she has a really active, vibrant life because she has the support of a home care worker. So that's another critical piece of this puzzle, is a 21st century home care workforce that can really support as many of our elders who choose to age in their homes.
Yeah, I hope we'll be able to have time to discuss fully the care network that you propose. But I was struck by a phrase you put in the early part of the book about the elder boom, that the problem with the current healthcare system is that the measure of success is delay of death rather than quality of life.
That's right. I mean, that is a major culture shift that has to happen throughout our healthcare delivery system. And, many oncologists and others have been saying for years that we need to be as concerned with quality of life as we are with treatments and cures and meds and the like. And I think that in this case in particular, how we live is really the question. Not how long, but how.
Mm-hmm. So let's look at all the pieces of the puzzle that need to kind of fit together neatly in order for us to do this. First of all, you mentioned that we all come from care at some point. We were cared for as a child. We care for others. It's a part of our DNA in a way.
It's true. We have this really strong cultural current around individualism in this country, and what it sometimes doesn't account for is the fact that we are all so interdependent, and that caregiving relationships are at the core of all of our experiences and our ability to be who we are and to reach our full potential in the world. So really making the role of caregiving in all of our lives much more visible and valued is going to be a key piece of this puzzle.
Mm-hmm. So we've got the family, who, if they learn to shift the values of American culture a little bit, they do want to care for their own families to a certain extent. And there are certain things that they probably are best equipped to do, and yet there are things that they're not equipped to do as well.
That's right. We value families in this country, and family caregivers are going to they already take care of the lion's share of caregiving work that has to happen. And right now we have a direct care workforce, a paid caregiving workforce of about 3 million workers. But with 27 million people in need in the future, we're going to need millions more workers. And it's not to replace family caregivers, it's to complement and support and to fill out the kind of care team that could actually meet all of our needs and respond to the different kinds of needs that people have. It's just simply not realistic for all of us to leave our jobs and care for our loved ones, and it really is a full-time endeavor in many instances. Not always, but in many instances. And we think that it's going to be a coordinated, all-hands-on-deck effort between families, paid caregivers, and healthcare providers and professionals, all of us together.
And those home care folks really are, unfortunately, low on the rung of valued workers in many instances. And that's part of what your work has been about, is to upgrade the standard and the quality with which they deal with this.
They are not only valuable, they're going to be a key piece of the solution for the future for all of us. The home care workforce is the fastest growing occupation in the country right now because of this need, and it's only going to continue in the next 20 and 30 years. and yet it's one of the most underpaid, undervalued workforces in the country. So right at the time when we should be thinking about how we grow these jobs and turn these jobs into 21st century American jobs that you can really take pride in and each generation can do better than the next, this workforce, most of them are struggling in poverty. And in fact, I just talked to a worker yesterday who told me that she spent the last few weeks eating hard-boiled eggs and bananas because she didn't have enough money to pay to make ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
When the people that we count on to take care of our families can't take care of their own, we're in trouble. So we've got to really fix that.
Mm-hmm. And these underappreciated folks are doing dirty jobs in some cases, and the idea of, a health care plan or a paid double time and a half for overtime or 24 hours off or a paid vacation, that's unheard of in this profession almost.
It really is, unfortunately, and that is exactly what needs to change. This workforce needs to come out of the shadows, and with training and support and a living wage, this workforce can help us manage chronic illnesses better, make sure that we avoid unnecessary emergency room visits. I mean, this is really about modernizing our approach to healthcare in a way that's much more holistic, quality of life based, and connected.
Mm-hmm. So we have to advocate for decent labor standards for these folks, and in some cases they're not only hamstrung by the fact that they're dependent on a family employer who doesn't have regulations regarding how to treat them, but they also might be undocumented immigrants.
And they might be, and in fact, hundreds of thousands of American families count on undocumented workers to make sure that their own family care needs are met and that they can participate fully in the economy. We're already interdependent. I mean, this, in so many ways, within the American family itself, there's so many immigrant and non-immigrant people working together to make our families work in this economy. It's time we really acknowledge that and figure out how we can bring these relationships into the full light of our economy.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's somewhere in the book you mentioned the fact that the immigrant workforce has to be part of the solution.
It has to be. There's no other way that we will actually have the kind of workforce we need for the future. I mean, there's going to be a need for at least 2 million more workers in the sector in the next 10 years, and many more going into the future. And so immigrant workers will be not all of the workforce by any stretch, but a huge and significant part of the workforce that needs to be trained and supported and strengthened to support our families to age with dignity.
On this program a little over a year ago, we interviewed a guy who wrote a book called The Next 100 Years, and one of the things he suggests is 20 years from now, we won't be building fences to keep people out. We'll be trying to create systems to draw them in.
That's right.
So,
that's right, and this is one area where it is a complete win-win situation. We have an incredible need here, and caregiving workforce, many of whom are immigrants who take enormous pride in this work, want to do this work, believe in its value, and we should really professionalize and support them.
Mm-hmm. And it's also important, I think, for people to recognize that this isn't just about lifting people in and out of bed and changing diapers and cleaning them. I mean, they do nutrition work and physical therapy and psychotherapy and sometimes emergency response, and they're teachers and organizers, and I mean there's so many roles that need to be fulfilled in this.
You said it. That's exactly right. And there's also just an incredible emotional human connection there that really speaks to this question of quality of life, to make sure that people aren't alone. I mean, the stories I hear, one of the stories in the book is a worker named Erlinda who is Catholic and very religious and brings her faith to work with her and often sings hymns to her patients. And she has this one favorite patient she calls My Lady, who she used to sing to every day because she would ask, "Would you please sing to me, Erlinda?" And one day, instead of asking for a song, she asked for her to take her hand. And Erlinda knew right away, because she's on the front line with her, she knew right away that she was getting ready to transition, and so was able to call together the family, and everybody was able to be together with her lady as she transitioned. And she supported not only a dignified quality of life to that moment of transition, but also supported her through that moment and enabled her family to be together in a way that was about strengthening the whole of the family. And so there's this powerful role that is emotional in addition to skills-based that these caregivers are playing for us.
Mm-hmm. And that story was touching, and I think it leads to the conclusion that we need to recognize when these people are working inside our homes, they're where our most intimate experiences are, and they're in essence as much a part of the family as anyone in some ways.
That's exactly right. And in some instances, many family caregivers tell me that if it weren't for having somebody who wasn't a part of the family being a part of the family and playing that role, they couldn't, even within the family, keep it together, given how emotional and challenging the dynamics can become. So in some ways, I've heard the term guardian angel, I've heard the term mediator. These caregivers are playing a really critical role in our families.
Mm-hmm. And so if they're, in a way, part of the family, then we would expect the respect, the benefits, the bonuses that employees are treated in good places of employment have.
Absolutely. And we would expect that, immigrant or not, that they would be valued members of our society.
Mm-hmm. By contrast of the home care model, people who work for agencies and work in the institutions and nursing homes don't really get to forge that kind of relationship more often than not.
No, there are many problems and challenges with the institutional model of nursing homes, and of course there are some nursing homes that are really good models, but for the most part, the institutional model, there's a reason why Americans don't prefer it. It tends to be cold, highly medicalized, and much easier to get prescription drugs than to get the kind of warmth and care that oftentimes people need in the supporting the quality of life question.
So this book is a great resource in a lot of ways. One of them is the appendices, the resources for families and how to get involved. Let's talk a little bit about building that care network and how it gets paid for.
Well, it's going to be, again, an all-hands-on-deck matter. Individuals and families, I think we all need to be thinking about how are we preparing financially for our future caregiving needs. And then we need to really take this into the public. I mean, never before has there been an experience that we're all sharing. Everybody has some caregiving story. And yet it never appears in the public conversation about the future of this country and the kind of public policy we need to support American families. And so we need to take this from behind closed doors into the public conversation, and we've got an important election cycle coming in 2016. We need to let our elected officials know that this is a national priority for Americans so that we can have the kinds of supports for families like tax credits and figuring out social policy that will actually support long-term care needs. Right now we don't have any policy that supports long-term care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really scary when we think about the demographics. You mentioned at one point we prepare so extensively and with so much love for birth in our families and homes, but for the miracle of death, we're just not prepared.
That's right. And, these are all natural cycles of life, and having a plan really helps. Mm-hmm. It is, life is full of twists and turns and messy moments and hard times, but also joyful times. And what often makes it easier is when we have plans and when we work through those plans with our families and communities And we as a country do not have a plan around the caregiving needs that we will have. And the opportunity is for us to really have a say then in what it looks like when we do develop that plan. And that's what we're hoping to spark with this book and the book tour, is to really turn everyone's attention towards how do we work together, seize upon this opportunity to shape the future in a way that really does meet our needs.
Mm-hmm. And there's some interesting models that give us hope for some possibilities that we may not have thought of, villages and commune living for elders that have friends and family nearby.
Oh, yes. And, to use the word commune makes it sound a little outdated or something. But I think that there are fantastic community-based models that have come up with ingenious, solution-oriented people who've just basically taken matters into their own hands and developed solutions. So the village movement is a really great example. There are almost 200 villages around the country, and they're growing in every community that I come across. And it's basically where people are building intentional communities where they're pooling resources and pooling their buying consumer power so that they're sharing and getting reduced rates on groceries, reduced rates on transportation and travel. They're getting social workers and caregivers to actually work in teams with groups of them so that it actually helps with the affordability of all of the things that we need to live well. And it's a brilliant model that we need to support. And public policy can help support those to grow in every community in this country. And that's the kind of thing, it's like we need to be innovative and support the innovation that's coming from the bottom up, from everyday people. And we need to be thinking proactively about how do we leverage our collective voice as voters in this country to put into place the infrastructure and capacity so that these things can really grow and thrive.
One of the models that interested me, we've only got a couple of minutes, but I did want to mention the Care Pod that Care to Own has dreamed up, because I like that idea.
I like it too. It's basically that caregivers and their families act as hosts to elders that they would be caring for and supporting. And so, creating, an intentional community where caregivers and their families live, and they host elders to also live in extra apartments, and elders contribute to the eventual home ownership of the apartments for the caregivers. Mm-hmm. So it's an integrated model where you can share in the caregiving responsibilities and also share in the financing of affordable housing for families who need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope that all of these ideas get discussed and that we come to a much more enlightened approach. You mentioned the upcoming serious election cycle, and we've got to have these conversations before that so that people are aware, willing to think about the shift in values that needs to take place, and use resources like this great book, The Age of Dignity. Ai-Jen Poo, thank you so much for being a part of our program this morning. I remind our listeners that if you don't hear our interview 4 times a week when it's broadcast on 88 FM, you can also find us on YouTube at Good Books Radio Strong and Cook. We are underwritten by audiobooks.com. Try one today for free. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. Thanks for listening.